Hi everyone. Today I'm sharing some mysterious and chilling stories from Russia. These were gathered from various sources, forums, and comments. About a year and a half ago, I had a pretty strange experience. A friend and I went on what was supposed to be a hunting trip, but honestly, it was more of a walk through the forest than actual hunting, though we figured if luck was on our side, maybe we'd catch something. Toward evening, as it was starting to get dark, we reached an old hunting tower along our route. We considered staying there for the night, but decided to head to our own tower instead. It was sturdier, a bit bigger, and besides, it wasn't too far to go. We were walking through the forest, chatting, when suddenly we heard a scream. Not the kind of scream you hear when someone yells, but more like the sound someone makes when they're hit or startled. Then it was dead silent. We froze, both of us a little stunned, and just stood there listening. It didn't seem far away, maybe 50 meters or so, but in the forest at night, sounds can carry much farther. We stayed still for about 5 minutes, didn't hear anything else, and decided to keep going. We switched on our flashlights, rifles ready, just in case. And then, it happened again. This time, the scream was loud, unnervingly loud, and so close it made my heart drop. It didn't sound human. My friend panicked and fired several shots in the direction of the sound. Reflexively, I fired a couple of rounds too, then silence again. The only sound left was the wind rustling the treetops. As we got closer, things got even weirder. The bushes around us started rustling and we could hear twigs snapping all around. We shone our flashlights, but there was nothing, no one. It felt like something was circling us, and the sheer eeriness of it sent chills down our spines. When we reached the tower, we climbed up as quickly as we could. There was no door, so we just sat there at the top, rifles in hand, scanning the area below with our flashlights. At first, it was quiet again. We stayed like that for about 2 hours, slowly calming down. We even started joking to ease the tension. And then we heard it. Voices. Not words, but this low, indistinct mumbling, as if someone was talking far away, but staying in one place. We switched on our flashlights, and it stopped, but only for a minute. Then the mumbling started again, only closer this time. It was this strange, gruff voice, with an almost howling tone to it. We sat there, one of us watching the door, and the other looking out the window, turning our heads in every direction. But we couldn't see anything. Yet the sound kept getting closer. I couldn't take it anymore and fired a couple of rounds into the air. For a while, everything went silent. About 20 minutes later, it started again, this time with rustling sounds below us. It was like the swishing of nylon pants or something similar. My friend fired a shot, and the rustling stopped again. We decided to turn off our flashlights and only use them if necessary. We sat in the dark for another 2 hours. It stayed quiet, but the tension was unbearable. Around 1 a.m., it all escalated. Voices started coming from every direction, accompanied by rustling, knocking, and other strange noises. At one point, I thought I saw something, or someone, and fired half a magazine in that direction out of sheer fear. It went quiet for about 10 minutes. But then it started up again. Footsteps below, running and walking, shouting, mumbling. We kept firing 2 or 3 rounds in different directions, but it didn't stop. Finally, just before dawn, it all went silent. We stayed on the platform until full daylight, too scared to move. When we eventually climbed down, we cautiously checked the area. There was nothing, no footprints, no signs of anyone being there. The only thing we found were a couple of broken bushes, but we figured we might have shot them ourselves. We headed out of the forest and back to the village where we'd left our car. While we packed up and changed clothes, we decided to ask the locals about what had happened. One elderly man told us that strange things had started happening in that forest after logging began. Workers had abandoned the area at night, and even security guards refused to stay after dark. Now, they said, only daytime shifts were possible because the forest seemed to chase people out at night. And now, a year and a half later, I still can't explain whether it all really happened or if it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But I wasn't alone. There's no way both of us could have been affected like that. Fortunately, it seems it didn't leave any lasting impact on our psyche. In May 2020, during the lockdown, I spent time in my home village in the Krasnoyarsk region. The house faces the forest, just 4 meters away from the backyard. It's peaceful, quiet, and surrounded by nature, perfect for spending time outdoors. Since I didn't have to get up early in the morning, I stayed up late, until 2 or 3 a.m. One night, around 1:30 a.m., I went outside to smoke. A strong wind had picked up, and as I stood there, facing the forest, I heard the strangest sound. Despite the wind and the noise of the trees, there was this eerie, haunting whistle. It sounded almost like the squeaking of metal swings, but there were no metal swings anywhere in our area. I froze in place, hair standing on end as a chill ran down my spine. The sound was coming from just 4 or 5 meters past the fence, right in front of me. I've spent my whole life around forests and the taiga, picking mushrooms and berries, camping for days at a time, but I'd never heard a whistle like that. It was so clear and distinct, even with the wind howling. I stood there, nervously finished my cigarette, and went back inside. I pulled out all my books on animals and birds and started searching. I compared recordings online, playing every possible sound I could find, but I didn't come across anything even remotely similar. The next morning, my neighbor came over to smoke. He's an experienced hunter and fisherman, someone who's spent a lifetime outdoors. I told him the whole story and tried to describe the sound. He said he'd never heard anything like that in our area. By evening, the wind had died down. Around 2 a.m., I went outside to smoke again, and there it was, the same whistle. This time, it wasn't right in front of me, but about 40-50 meters to the left, still only 4 or 5 meters deep into the forest. I was stunned. It felt even creepier without the wind. The night was calm, and yet the sound seemed to be moving. It lasted from 2 a.m. to about 3 or 3:30 a.m. The next morning around 8 a.m., I went to see my uncle. He's a seasoned hunter, someone who's spent his life in the taiga. I told him everything, expecting answers. He finished his cigarette, then said, "You know, I've walked the taiga my whole life, but I've never heard anything like that. Tonight, I'll come over. We'll take flashlights and go see what's making that noise." I also invited my neighbor, and by 1 a.m., we were all at my place, drinking tea and getting ready. At 2 a.m., we went outside and waited. At first, nothing happened. It was quiet. I started feeling embarrassed, like I'd dragged everyone out for nothing. But I insisted we wait, because I'd heard it 2 nights in a row. And then, at exactly 2:30 a.m., it started again. This time, it was about 300 meters to the left of the house. The weather was perfect, no wind, total silence, and the sound was crystal clear. I looked at the 2 seasoned hunters, and for the first time, I saw unease and confusion in their eyes. "There it is," I said. It was this eerie whistle or squeak, and they both said, almost simultaneously, "That's no bird." I asked, "An animal, maybe?" "No, there's no animal that makes a sound like that." "Should we go take a look?" We had 3 good flashlights, so they agreed. We walked into the forest, stopping about 5 or 6 meters from where the sound was coming from. Should we light it up? On 3, we turned on all the flashlights at once, pointing them toward the source of the sound. But there was nothing there. No one. Nothing visible. And then suddenly, something big and powerful bolted from that spot deeper into the forest. It was absolutely terrifying to hear. I wasn't even this scared when I saw a bear in the taiga. Whatever it was, as it ran, it broke large, massive branches. It was clear from the sound. The night was so quiet that we could hear every step it took as it ran away. The neighbor let out a piercing scream of fear, while my uncle immediately crouched down. We were all in shock, with wide eyes and hair standing on end. Without a word, we bolted back to the yard. We sat on the bench, smoked in silence, and then went our separate ways. Of course, in the following days, we came up with different theories. But that only made it even more terrifying for me. I had an experience once that I'll never forget. It was the 90s in Russia. I was 13 years old at the time, and we were living in Krasnoyarsk. One weekend, my family and some family friends went on a trip to the taiga. There were about 10 of us, along with 2 large dogs. On the first day, I really liked a spot near the river where we'd been hanging out with the kids. For some reason, I decided to go back there on my own from our campsite. I still don't know why. I found the spot, but it turned out to be farther away than I thought. It took me about an hour to get there. I walked around for a while, throwing rocks and sticks into the river, but when I tried to head back, I couldn't remember the way. Or rather, I wasn't sure which direction was the right one. So, I started walking, but after more than an hour, I realized I wasn't going the right way. I turned around and walked for another hour, but still couldn't find the river. That's when I started to panic. I began shouting and wandering aimlessly through the forest. I started noticing that I was passing places I had already been, and the fear hit me hard. I didn't know at the time why people tend to walk in circles when they're lost in the forest. Evening came. I was crying. It felt like someone was following me in the twilight. I'd walk and hear footsteps not far behind me. When I stopped, the footsteps stopped too. It was getting darker, and visibility in the forest was getting worse. I stopped crying because I was too scared to make any sound. By then, it was clear I'd be spending the night in the forest. I started thinking about what to do, and decided to climb a tree while I could still see. I picked a tree that was easy enough to climb and had a canopy where I could settle in for the night. Luckily, I'd spent my childhood building tree houses. As I was climbing, my foot got stuck between a branch and the trunk. It wasn't serious, but it was enough to make my boot start to slip off. When I kept climbing, the boot fell completely. By then, it was completely dark. I looked down and could just make out the outline of my boot on the ground. I thought, forget it. I don't need it right now. I'll grab it in the morning when I climb down. I probably don't need to describe how I felt as a kid lost in the taiga, alone with no adults around. I'd never spent the night alone before, not even at home. I settled into the tree, luckily in a fairly comfortable spot and high enough off the ground. I started hearing all kinds of sounds. It was terrifying, even though I was old enough to know that some were just night birds or small animals scurrying around. But then I started hearing footsteps in the distance. They were clearly human, two-legged and steady, like whoever it was knew exactly where they were going. No rushing, no hesitation. And the sounds were getting closer. I was terrified. I hunched my shoulders, pulling my head down into my jacket, leaving only my eyes exposed. I was too scared to breathe. I thought it might be one of the adults looking for me, and that I should call out, let them know where I was. But I was so scared that I stayed silent like a mouse. And in hindsight, I think that was the right choice. Whoever it was eventually reached my tree. They didn't use a flashlight or make any sound other than the crunching of leaves and twigs underfoot. Fear completely paralyzed me. Then it started hitting the tree. It hit so hard that dry branches began falling to the ground. I could feel the vibrations through the trunk. I was clenching my teeth so tightly that I needed dental treatment afterward. My whole body was frozen, and my mind shut down completely. My fingers curled tightly. My eyes felt like they were about to pop out of their sockets, and my teeth were locked together. In a way, I'm grateful my mind shut down like that. After some time, though I had no sense of how long, I felt something hit me. It was my boot, the one that had fallen when I climbed the tree. If I hadn't been paralyzed with fear, I probably would have screamed. I don't remember how I was found in the morning, or how I was brought down from the tree. I just remember waking up in the hospital later. Thankfully, I was alive and unharmed physically, but I had to spend time there because of my mental state. I've been hunting since I was a kid. At first, I went with my dad, and later, I started going on my own. One day, I decided to go hunting for deer in the Altai Mountains of Kazakhstan on Mount Beluga. I stayed overnight in a small hunting cabin. It was around 10 p.m., and I was sitting by the lamp, reading a book. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside, rustling sounds and these deep, heavy breaths, like something big was out there. It sounded like a moose or maybe a bear, huffing loudly. I sat there listening for a while. About 40 minutes passed. I prepared my rifle, just in case. I wanted to step outside, but something stopped me. And then, something or someone started pulling on the door handle. I froze. An animal, even a bear, doesn't do that. At that moment, I literally felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Thank God the door had a bolt on the inside, and it was locked. I turned off the lamp, grabbed my rifle, and quietly sat in the corner. My hands were shaking, and I could feel my hair standing on end from head to toe. Whatever it was kept pulling the door handle gently, almost quietly, and I could still hear its heavy breathing. There was a small window in the cabin, but I was too terrified to look out. After some time, it climbed onto the roof, and the whole structure creaked under its weight as dust flew everywhere. At that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. Out of pure fear, not courage, I screamed and fired my rifle straight up into the chimney. It let out a blood-curdling howl, fell off the roof, and ran away. I stayed in that corner, clutching my rifle, unable to sleep for the rest of the night. When morning finally came, I packed up all my stuff and got out of there as fast as I could. When I got home, I saw I had a bunch of gray hairs on my head and beard. It's been 10 years since that night. I have never gone back to the forest to hunt. I'm too scared to even walk in a park in the evening. After experiencing something like that, no sane person would ever want to go through it again. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, not even my worst enemy. Once I was vacationing in the south, in a town called Gorichi Kluch. I decided to visit one of the local attractions, Dante's Gorge. It's a beautiful place with a chapel and a natural spring. I climbed up the stone steps, and then I decided to leave the main trail and explore the forest. After all, it's a nature reserve, and taking a short walk seemed interesting. I roughly remembered how to return, and though my phone was left in the car, I didn't take it seriously. After walking for a while, I decided to head back along the same path I had taken. But as I walked, I realized I should have reached the gorge by now. It was getting dark, and I started to panic. I remembered a tip from a survival book: climb the tallest tree you can find to get a better view and orient yourself. That turned out to be much harder than I expected. As I climbed, I tore my clothes and scratched my hands. When I finally reached the top, The tree swayed back and forth, and I clung to the trunk for dear life to avoid falling. From the top, I realized I had chosen the shortest tree in the area. Frustrated, I carefully began climbing back down. On the way down, I got even more scratched up, but by then, I didn't care anymore. I decided to climb another tree. To this day, I don't know where I found the strength. And then, the shock hit me. It turned out the first tree I had climbed was actually the tallest one around. I couldn't believe it. Sitting at the top of the second tree, I just stared in disbelief. My clothes were shredded, my hands were covered in cobwebs, and my palms were sticky with sap. By that time, it was completely dark. I couldn't just stand there doing nothing, so I started walking in the dark. I found a faint trail, but couldn't see anything beyond it. I started quietly repeating a prayer to myself. Lord, have mercy, save me, and protect me. I kept saying it the entire way. Finally, I stumbled into a small clearing. At that moment, the moon came out from behind the clouds, and I looked around. The clearing was surrounded by dense, dark forest. My legs were giving out, and I was so exhausted I could barely stay awake. I fought to stay conscious, but my body wouldn't listen. I lay down right on the grass. The last thing I remember, before falling asleep, was something huge and dark leaning over me in the moonlight. There was also a strange, unpleasant smell, but I didn't care anymore. I wasn't afraid. I felt completely calm and indifferent. After that, I fell into a deep sleep. I woke up to the sun shining directly in my face. Still lying down, I looked around and saw an elderly man about 10 meters away from me. I thought he was a mushroom forager. But when I got up very quickly, not even a second had passed, and he was already gone. The last thing I wanted was to see whatever that huge creature was again. I ran in whatever direction I could, and to my surprise, I quickly made it back to Dante's Gorge. This is a story about my grandfather, something that happened to him back in the late 1960s in the Soviet Union, when he was around 30 years old. He and a friend went to a village in the Tvera region to visit a third friend. That friend had promised them a 3-day hike through the surrounding forests. On the very first day, while they were setting up camp, the friend he came with climbed a tree, jumped down awkwardly, and dislocated his arm. There wasn't much they could do, so they decided that my grandfather would stay at the camp while the friend from the village took the injured man back to see a doctor, get his arm set, and pick up some medicine. My grandfather stayed behind. He built a fire, had dinner, and went to bed around 11 p.m. That night, he woke up with a strange, uneasy feeling. At first, he thought, well, I'm alone in the forest, in an unfamiliar place. This is probably normal. He climbed out of the tent to get some water, and that's when he realized, wake up. Someone was calling his name. A soft, feminine voice was calling him from somewhere not too far away. At first, he thought it might be his friends returning and playing a prank on him. He called out, "Hey, I'm here!" But the calling didn't stop. Moreover, he clearly heard that it was a woman's voice, and it had a strange, almost wailing tone. Standing there in the dark, he started to feel more and more uneasy. After a few minutes, the calling stopped. But almost immediately, he heard the sound of a large branch snapping somewhere about 100 meters away. Then, the same sound came from the opposite direction, but closer. He stood there frozen, his fear growing with every sound. His only weapon was a small knife, and he knew that if this was a large animal, the knife would be useless. And then the woman's voice started calling his name again. It was soft and almost soothing, but that only made it more terrifying. Eventually, my grandfather managed to move. He climbed back into the tent, zipped it shut, and sat there until dawn, clutching his knife and shaking with fear. By morning, everything was quiet. When his friends returned, my grandfather told them what had happened. The friend from the village said he had heard from neighbors about strange things happening in those woods, but he had never believed it. He thought it was just scary stories and old tales. The world is full of mysteries and secrets that we may one day be able to comprehend. See you soon.